Welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plot lines, characters, and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. So today we are jumping on for Campaign 1, Episode 26, Part 2, I believe. And Today is Petall.
Hello.
All right, so the icebreaker for today is, are you a morning, afternoon, or night person?
It really depends. Like, it's interesting. I think my natural rhythm has me more of a night person because during the height of the pandemic with when everything was on lockdown and all of that, I would stay up absurdly late and then sleep in for a while. But now I'm working a job where I work 7 to 3 most days. So I think I've kind of been I think if left to my own devices, I would be more of a night person than a morning person. But because I'm a very adaptable person and I've had to adapt to waking up at 5:30 every morning to get to work at 7 a.m. most days. Some days I work 1 to 9, but that's only a couple days a week. Now I find that I'm waking up earlier in the morning. So
yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
I've always been one of those people that loves my sleep. Like, I have always slept for very long hours, from childhood onward. And I think I actually got tonsillitis when I was a kid, around 5, and it gave me sleep apnea because my tonsils were so big, they were blocking my airways while I was sleeping. And so I would lose oxygen regularly throughout the night. And so I think that just set me up for long sleeping periods in order to make up for the lack of oxygen that I was getting. And even after I got them taken out, I've routinely slept 9 to 12 hours a night consistently.
Wow.
So it honestly doesn't matter when those 9 to 12 hours happen. I just have to have those 9 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So if I'm waking up early, if I have a job that requires me to be there at 7 a.m., then I go to bed at 8 p.m.
That makes sense. I always try to go to bed early for before my 7 to 3s, but sometimes especially when I've got a quick turnaround on Wednesdays, today when we're recording, I've got I have a turnaround. I've got a 1 to 9, and then the very next day I work 7 to 3. And so since I'm my brain has been in work mode, it's always hard to fall asleep. And then it's even when I try to take melatonin, I frequently wake up in the middle of the night because I'm worried. I'm my brain's oh, I need to wake up and go back to work soon. My brain never really leaves work mode no matter what I do to try to take some time before going to sleep. And it's
Yeah. And if it's the other end of the spectrum too, if I have a job that makes me stay up late, I then sleep into noon, the next day.
Yeah.
It was funny, in college, I had this one job. I was a dorm patroller. And so I worked 9 to 5, but 9 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Wow.
One weekend night every week was my schedule for this dorm patrolling position. And it paid pretty well. It was $10 an hour at the time, which was fantastic. But at any rate, I would have to sleep till 2 p.m. day in order to make up for it, because I just needed that sleep in. So if I'm on my natural schedule, I'm a middle of the day person. I go to bed usually before midnight, wake up usually before 10 a.m., that kind of span. So solid middle of the day kind of person. But again, as long as I get that requisite sleep in, I'm pretty comfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that was a rough gig though, the 9 to 5 in the middle of the night. I was once it got to be 4 a.m. and I was the only one awake on campus, I'm do I just go hang out in the student lounge and pretend I'm working, but AKA nap?
Yeah. Oh, I was doing night shifts at my job up until very recently, up until about September. And I did about 10 months of night shifts, and I remember how rough they were.
Yeah. All right, well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well, so please comment, like, share below. And ready? All right, let's dive in. All right, so this time we're trying a little bit something different. We're going to start handing off the summaries of these episodes. So take it away, Petall.
All right. We start with some of Vox Machina going down into the basement and hearing blacksmithing noises coming from Percy's room. Keyleth knocks on the door and lets Percy know that it is her at the door. Percy basically brushes her off, says not right now, says that he needs to clear his head. Keyleth lets him know that Vox Machina is there for him and asks him like if he slept and if he needs anything. He says he doesn't need anything. And then Keyleth tries to fill Percy in on everything that happened in the first half of the episode, with them being interrogated about the old woman that they killed, but he interrupts and goes back to work. Then we kind of shift over to a cell at the bottom of Greyskull Keep. The cell is described as pristine, never having been used, and a servant boy is described hanging from the manacles. It is the same boy that Percy shot the hand off of. Keyleth does cure wounds. Fingers are still gone, but the kind of like bleeding stops and things start looking a little better. Vex starts to inspect for bite marks as he begins to come to, but finds nothing. Keyleth wants to do a check for a mind control spell, but he is not conscious enough to tell whether or not he is being mind controlled or not. At this point, he begins to come even more to and start asking where he is. Vex explains that he is being held for his own safety, and begins kind of going on this spiel about how the Briarwoods would be really angry at him for everything that happened, and that all of this here in the jail cell is to protect him. Keyleth begins to interrupt and ask whether Vox Machina, whether do they all not feel like terrible people. The servant boy begins to speak, reveals his name is Desmond, says that he is the son of a messenger. Vex asks for confirmation if the Briarwoods are bad and asks for any information he can give on them. Desmond begins to talk about how he wasn't supposed to get away. Grog gives him a cup of ale to kind of loosen him up. Desmond begins to talk about how he doesn't trust them because of what they did to him with his hand and asks what they want to know. Vex asks if the Briarwoods are vampires. Desmond begins to talk about how mothers would tell their kids at Whitestone not to wander out at night because dark things crawl in the shadows. Talks about how Lady Briarwood has been seen going out in daylight, but Lord Briarwood doesn't make too many public appearances. Scanlan asks about whether there have been any strange sounds or disappearances coming from Whitestone. Vex does another cure wounds as he begins to cough up a bit more blood. Then Desmond reveals that his father worked for the DeRollo family before the Briarwoods vanished, and it vanished the night that the Briarwoods took over. His mother was taken by madness not too long after. Desmond talks about how he knows the roads of Tal'Dorei very well, so he was made the coachman, was paid a little and left alone. He began to talk about how shortly after the DeRollo family was killed, the nobles were dragged out. It took days before the people of Whitestone even knew what was happening, until the Briarwoods called a town meeting to announce their new rule. Many objected, but any who objected were shot down at arrow point. The Briarwoods then executed the noble families in front of everybody and redistributed the titles to the mercenaries and allies. A number of families fled to the woods to try to escape the Briarwoods, and they were all found hanging from the sun tree the next morning. Gradually, life began to return to a somewhat normal in Whitestone as people began to keep farming, logging, and mining in the white marble mines. They were promised safety if they didn't leave. That lasted for a few years until the nobles got bored and started to abuse the people of Whitestone and basically started treating them like animals. Desmond was beaten by his employer at the time, Tyleri. Lord Briarwood noticed, asked to speak to Desmond in private. Desmond began to talk about how Lord Briarwood has a way of drawing the truth out of you, and how he then shared what had been happening. Lord Briarwood said that he did not appreciate the sort of boorish violence and took Desmond in as a driver. The next day, Tyleary was found hanging from the sun tree. Though Desmond says that sort of respite was short-lived, because the more that he got to know the Briarwoods, the more nightmarish they were. He began to talk about the perverse magic and sacrilege that they partook in. He told Vox Machina that all of the servants left in Castle Whitestone were undead, and that the garden had shriveled up, leaving a foul green mist. He began to tell them about how they were excavating something in the dungeons, bringing up a lot of relics, books, and bones, and how it has shifted his perspective. He knows that death has no real end, and is just basically really traumatized by the whole thing. Vex offers to protect Desmond in exchange for sharing this story to Uriel and the guards, talking about how they may be able to get an army to fight the Briarwoods. Keyleth begins to talk about how there's an option to save Whitestone. Desmond starts crying and says, "They're going to find me. You don't know what they've done." Scanlan reassures that he is safe and is protected by powerful people. Grog talks about how they fought the Briarwoods and how they managed to get away. Keyleth offers Desmond a guest room, so he no longer has to stay in the jail cell. Vex begins to talk about how a guest room is far more comfortable, but is a little less safe. Desmond opts to stay in the dungeon instead of a guest room. Vex promises to bring a bed. Scanlan talks about how they caught Vox Machina on a day when they were trying to be nice. Desmond says that he needs to think, and he's been promised protection before from other Briarwood enemies, but has found that he has been mistreated in turn by them. Keyleth says that enemies of the Briarwoods can be allies. Desmond finds the conversation taxing and says that he is done talking. Grog tells him to keep the goblet that he gave him the ale in. Keyleth offers food. Grog brings down a bed so he no longer has to stay shackled up in the dungeons and is just kind of locked in there for his own safety. Vox Machina then find that Percy has been listening into the whole conversation with Desmond. Vex asks Percy if he is all right. Percy says that he's fine and returns to his room. Desmond begins freaking out and says, "Keep him away from me." Scanlan reassures that Percy is a friend and has a similar history to Desmond, where his whole family was killed by the Briarwoods. Desmond eats and then immediately passes out on bed, exhausted from this whole thing. The party begins to talk about ways to keep Desmond safe. And talks about finding maybe a potential trigger system in case, Percy, they're unsure of how Percy's doing and are worried that he might come and finish the job with Desmond. Vex mentions wanting to check out the bird creature that they were asked to investigate. Scanlan suggests leaving a guard to protect Desmond, and they decide on Jarrett. Vex stays at the prison while Scanlan goes to find Jarrett at the top of the tower. Scanlan tells Jarrett about the situation, specifically mentions that if Percy comes to try to hurt Desmond, to stop Percy without hurting either party. Jarrett says that he is well suited for the job, there should be no issue, and agrees. Scanlan tells him that it'll be compensated with some extra gold for the job. Tiberius at this point is trying to get into the Cloudtop district and is stopped by guards. He tells the guards that he is here to see Allura and asks to pass on a message or to just let him pass so that he can talk to her himself. The guards decline. Tiberius asks again that they just let him through, and the guards decline again. So Tiberius casts flying on himself and goes back to the keep. He ends up flying to the roof where Vax is. Vax fills Tiberius in on the situation with Desmond. Tiberius makes a comment about how nobody likes him anywhere. Vax offers a drink from his flask, notes that Tiberius never drinks alcohol, but Tiberius accepts and drains the flask. Tiberius immediately becomes drunk. Grog comes up to ask if they were about to hunt for the big bird because he feels like eating chicken. There becomes a huge scramble of words as Tiberius is drunk, starts talking about how Allura doesn't like him anymore. Then Keyleth enters the scene and Tiberius tries to like hug Keyleth or make some sort of physical contact with her, which she immediately brushes him off and says, "Don't touch me right now." Vax explains that he thought that Tiberius was going to say no to the alcohol and that Tiberius didn't leave anything left in the flask for him. Tiberius starts to call this pretty face and talk about human kissy mouth, and begins to try to make contact with Keyleth once more. Keyleth says, "If you touch me one more time," and sort of like removes herself from the situation. She gets mad, saying that she was trying to deal with something else and is not using any spell slots at this point to fix drunk Tiberius. Tiberius then leaves to get a sandwich. The party then talks about how they are going to protect Desmond. Keyleth offers to cast either Wall of Thorns, hallucinatory terrain, or use conjure woodland beings to create wolves or bears to protect the cell. Tiberius shows up with the sandwich and mentions Allura will fix everything. Grog shuts him up by covering his mouth. Scanlan pitches leaving someone behind to guard the cell. Drunk Tiberius begins causing a bit more trouble, and Keyleth says, "I don't want to burn a restoration spell on your drunkenness." Vex then offers to leave Trinket to protect the cell. Keyleth then suggests using Conjuring and Elemental and use Planar Binding to get 24 hours because Conjure Woodland Beings only lasts for 1 hour. They begin to talk about the benefits of fire versus water due to vampires not liking fire, and also the myth of vampires not being able to cross running water. Vax begins to talk to Tiberius. Grog tells Vax, "Don't talk to him, he's drunk." Tiberius tells Vex, "I love how you shoot arrows at things' eyeballs," and tells Vex that she is so pretty. Grog then covers Tiberius's mouth again. Keyleth offers the water elemental, and they discuss about the component. Grog offers a ruby the size of his palm that fits the cost. They begin to debate if now is the best time to use the components. They eventually leave Trinket with Jarrett. Vex tells Percy that Trinket is there for him to pet if he needs it, as Percy is staying behind. And they decide to, some time passes, and they decide to take the scenic route to let Tiberius sober up as they make their way to investigate the bird. They find their way to a farm, find the house of the Klauses, who are the people who ask them for their help. Scanlan lets them know they're here to help. Grog says, "We love old people," and the Klauses agree that they will offer fresh produce to Greyskull Keep in exchange for this problem being solved. Scanlan asks where the livestock are kept. They are told to the east side of the community, past residential clumps. They begin to talk about the livestock, and the focus lands on cows. Vex asks if one of Vox Machina can polymorph into a giant cow. Keyleth says that she can speak to cows. Keyleth asks where Kyle lives, who is the guy who first spotted the bird. They say that Kyle has been keeping an eye out near to where the livestock is kept. They go and find Kyle. They notice that the livestock is noticeably dwindled from what the pens are sized to keep. They find the house lights on with a crossbow across the lap of 19-year-old Kyle. Kyle is startled, asks who goes there. Scanlan says they are friends of the Klauses. Kyle asks if they have come to help. Vex says yes. Scanlan asks where they have been attacking lately. Kyle tries to leave and Keyleth stops him. Tiberius tries to say that they are Vox Machina and go on his whole spiel about how important they all are. Keyleth says that is irrelevant and asks him details about the birds. About the bird, Kyle says that it is hard to see in moonlight, but the bird tends to take away one cow in each claw. Tiberius asks about droppings. This is not answered. Kyle says that he has tried to shoot at the bird, but has missed with his crossbow. Grog then tries to intimidate Kyle and says that I've heard these birds are attracted to, and then gives the exact description of what Kyle looks like. Kyle freaks out, then goes to leave. Scanlan stops him to ask if he has a cowbell. Kyle says, "Your kid is weird," and keeps walking. Scanlan looks for a cowbell and finds one on the fence. Scanlan then pitches that they all become cows to become bait for the bird. Vex suggests that one person not be cows to keep an eye out. Vex says that she will lay in wait with arrows. Scanlan says that it'll be an illusion. No one will actually be a cow because he will cast seeming, which he does. They are become strangely shaped cows as they strangely sized cows as they cannot change their size, only their appearance with seeming. Scanlan makes a joke about cow mouflage and gets inspiration. So Vox Machina is now smaller than average cows. Keyleth offers to go and interview some cows. She goes to the cows and asks who the alpha male is. Matt says there are no males in the pen, they are cows. Tiberius tries to speak to the cow in common with his standard intro of I am Tiberius. Keyleth says that cows don't understand common because they are cows. She then casts speak with animals and asks, hello, ladies, how are you doing? They say that they are trying to sleep. She apologizes and asks about the bird. They say basically the cows don't give much good information. They're just general same stuff that they've already learned because they are cows and don't have a full understanding of the situation. All at this point, Vox Machina moves to out in the open so that they become the most attractive looking cows for the birds. Vex notches a bow and keeps a lookout on the sky, and they wait for about 2 hours until Vex sees a shadow across the moonlight and lets everyone know. Tiberius casts stone skin on himself. Keyleth makes herself look the most available. Grog goes into a cow rage. Vex hunters marks it. The bird is described as having a 100-foot wingspan as it gets closer. Tiberius uses the ring to cast slow on it as it swoops. Keyleth is immediately grasped in the talons, takes 23 points of slashing damage, is grappled, and is taken away by the bird. At this point, they all roll initiative. Vex fires 2 arrows at it for 26 points of damage each. Grog tries to throw his hammer at the bird with the chain to help it return, but misses. Vax uses a bonus action to activate Boots of Haste, runs towards the bird, keeps speed for a moment, throws his daggers upwards and miss. Keyleth attempts to cast Dominate Beast, but the bird is not affected as it is not a beast. The bird then does a double dash out of reach of Vox Machina, carrying Keyleth away with it. Vax shouts at Keyleth to try to break free. Scanlan then uses Dimension Door to land on the back of the bird, makes an acrobatics check to maintain balance and succeeds, sings a parody of That's What Makes You Beautiful by One Direction, and gives inspiration to everyone. Tiberius drops stone skin, casts fly on everyone, and goes after the bird. The bird is faster than them, but Vex's hunter's mark allowed them to track it. They end up reaching some coastal mountains, shoreline summit. Scanlan uses athletics to manage to stay on the bird for the whole journey. Keyleth then casts polymorph on the bird to turn it into a cow. The bird in cow form begins to plummet. Scanlan and Keyleth are falling from 500 feet in the air. Keyleth uses wild shape to change into an eagle. Everyone else from further away just sees the cow vanish from sight. Scanlan casts polymorph on himself to become a pterodactyl. Keyleth and Scanlan are noted to still look like cows from seeming while they are in their flying animal forms. The bird makes an impact on the ground, turns back into a bird, but has some injuries from the carried over damage. The bird is still a ways away and flies away towards the mountains. Vox Machina reunite and then continue to follow the bird. They spend about 5 minutes searching the mountain range until the bird movement comes to a stop. Vex begins to stealth as mountains are her favorite terrain. Everyone rolls stealth checks. Some fail. They find a nest on an outcropping with a bird within, and they suspect babies are also there. Vex and Grog go forward to try to make a perception check, but it is hard to see in the night. Scanlan looks for boulders to drop, but the mountains are too smooth for boulders. Then they hear a voice calling out from the darkness saying, "Flying cows, really? I care not for this insolence. You've come to fight me or to mock me. Do it now, but leave this creature alone." They check, and there's nothing arcane in nature. They can't see the source of this voice, but they know it is from the direction of the bird. Keyleth flies over as an eagle. Grog responds, "You've been stealing farmers' livestock. Give us a reason not to kill you." The voice says, "Your nature confuses me and your words are ill-informed. If you are going to come to speak of discourse, I am going to assume you are my enemy." Tiberius returns to dragonborn form with Dispel Magic. They notice that the source of the voice is vaguely humanoid. The voice calls out and says, "You will not harm this creature," and calls them poachers. Tiberius talks about how he was going to cast light, but he doesn't want to hurt the bird's eyes. The voice then talks about how confused that he is about how their cows and how they are tormenting this and severely wounding this beautiful creature. Vax rolls stealth with disadvantage, but gets a 31. They begin to get a view of the creature and the nest. It is made of driftwood and shipwrecks, whole trees, and wagon wheels. The bird is twitching and looks hurt. There's also a small humanoid about the size of Scanlan, repeating a hand motion that they recognize as Cure Wounds. Keyleth approaches and comes out of eagle form. Tiberius then casts light and uses hands to block it. The bird startles, but they see that the source of the voice is a gnome dressed in hides, leathers, and furs, and has greasy black hair and a beard. Tiberius apologizes for the light startling. The gnome casts Sparks again. Vax moves into attack, but then pauses. Grog shouts out, "Somebody talk to him before I kill his fucking bird." Tiberius casts Dispel Magic on Keyleth as per her request, so she no longer looks like a cow. Keyleth asks if this man is also a druid, and mentions that their goals might be aligned, and asks for the name of the bird. The gnome responds that this creature has no name to it yet. I myself am a protector of the wild. How he doesn't belong to any sort of group. It is just him on his own, and he hears the whispers of the wind as it calls for justice. Keyleth talks about how this is a noble goal. The gnome then complains about civilized people and has a distaste for livestock. He doesn't see why they would be used in such a manner. Tiberius begins talking about how stealing livestock is a crime. The gnome continues to talk about how he hunts for what he needs to keep him alive and how he is removed from society. Keyleth begins to step in between Tiberius and the gnome to not try to de-escalate the situation. The gnome says that his name is Byron. Tiberius offers potential nicknames for Byron and then introduces himself. The head of the bird kind of like lowers to take a closer look at them. Keyleth tries to reach out to pet, but it retracts from her touch and rears back defensively. Keyleth then kneels and produces good berries. The bird takes the good berries, but takes also a good chunk of Keyleth's hand with it. Keyleth is not too shaken and says, "That's a good girl." Keyleth then turns to address Byron and asks that he listen to her, explains that they did come here to kill, but upon seeing the situation, says that they do not want to bring the creature to death. Scanlan lands still as a pterodactyl. Byron asks if the Vox Machina will leave him alone. Vox Machina say that they will, but under one condition, that he leave the livestock alone. Byron then criticizes the way that Keyleth is a druid, saying that she is not like acting as she should in regards to nature. Keyleth talks about how just because one can appreciate nature does not mean one cannot also appreciate humanity. Byron explains that this is the last surviving rock of a clutch slain by giants. This is the best place that they have found. There's lots of food, that they plan on staying. Keyleth asks if the destruction the rock could cause, and asks if they could relocate out of town by about 50 to 100 miles, offers her help to tend to the safety as they travel out of the harm of poachers. Byron talks about how this is not the first place that they came, how they have scoured much of Tal'Dorei, and this is the most safest, most ignored place that they have found. At this point, Scanlan drops seeming on all of them, and Vox Machina all approach. Scanlan says that they are being nice and do not think that we will be the first, warns that more people will come as more livestock are taken. Byron says we have yet to provide a suitable alternative. Keyleth volunteers Tiberius to offer an alternative. He begins to speak of the bond between Byron and the bird, and Keyleth says that it was supposed to have some cool one-liner, how the other option was supposed to be death. Tiberius offers Whitestone. Keyleth says she doesn't know if that is a good idea. Byron asks about how far away Whitestone is, and Keyleth says that it's not a good idea to push this living creature off on other people, and they are already being held hostage by vampires. Tiberius asks about an agreement with Iman, food in exchange for protection. Byron talks about how he is naive in the way of men and how they lied and how nobody keeps their word. Vex offers Vasselheim as a potential and does a persuasion check to try to, but doesn't quite manage to beat that. Keyleth pleads for him to listen, saying that they're only trying to help, saying that she is talking honestly and talking calmly despite the injuries she had received from the bird is a sign of her honesty and dedication. Keyleth says that they have friends in Vasselheim that can help make sure that no contracts are put out on the rock. Vex says not to bring up contracts. Keyleth talks about how there are regulated mercenaries, and so there's less independent stuff going on. Byron voiced distaste for monster slayers and Vox Machina's role with the contracts beforehand. Scanlan begins to talk to Byron in Gnome and says, "You are looking at 6 large predators, and that this is their one and only warning, but if they don't listen, they will start trying to kill the bird." Byron asks about the distance. Vex says that it is several days over water. Scanlan offers a map and provisions and papers for Slayer's take so that they know of the situation and leave the rock out of their contracts. Tiberius takes out a scroll of teleportation. Keyleth mentions how the Vox Machina really doesn't need another death on their conscience today. Byron says it doesn't look like he has much of a choice in this situation, but agrees and asks that does this go poorly, that his death and the rock's death lay on Vox Machina's conscience. They make an agreement that they will leave 2 large livestock at sunrise as a sign that they are being honest and as provisions for the journey. Scanlan then bows, ringing the cowbell, and this agreement is settled. Keyleth also tells Byron about Pyra, if he is in need of potential friends. Byron mentions that he has had mixed dealings with the Ashari, so Keyleth takes it back. Vex begins to look for some dropped feathers. Byron kind of stops this, and then she asks, mentioning that they are very pretty. Byron makes some comment about elves and lets her have 3 rock feathers. Byron then asks them to leave, saying that he is through talking with words. Tiberius flies them all out, and they return to the Klaus family and let them know of the situation. Vex pays for 2 cows, 40 gold each, to be left as the offering. Vox Machina takes the cows and stay until sunrise. Some of the farmers come out to watch. The rock swoops down and grabs them and heads in the direction of the Osmit Sea. And then as the episode ends, Grog makes a beard check, and the other side of his beard is starting to set in. And that is everything that happened in this episode.
It's a long one. It is a long one.
It's a long one.
Yeah. Well, I'll go first. I mean, in this second half, I'm particularly struck by Keyleth. I kind of want to talk about Keyleth here because this is, I think, one of her more pivotal episodes, at least in the early part of the campaign, and because she is really at her threshold tolerance right now.
Yeah.
And each move that Tiberius makes in the second half, each move that pretty much everyone in the party makes in this second half is pushing her more and more over that threshold tolerance.
Oh, absolutely.
She is snappy in the second half. And I have had very mixed feelings about Keyleth over the years, and I think that's because I see so much of myself in her. And I think in this particular episode, we're seeing her righteous morality. She has a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong. And in this early part of the campaign, she gets very righteous about what her moral judgment is on their actions that's going on right now. And the group is starting to push back a little bit because they've been reminded several times throughout this episode about how bad it is to kill old people. Like,
Yeah.
we like old people, but it's that last, what's like when they're interrogating the prisoner, she brings it up again, and they get into this whole argument about like whether they should even be talking about this in front of the prisoner and things like that. And then she even brings it up again later on throughout the bird adventure as well.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating that there's this push and pull going on within the group, because I think Matt is specifically transitioning from monster of the week type of challenges for the group to more moral gray challenges in the group. Like, see how they're reacting to the Rock versus how they're reacting to the old woman. Because essentially they're like equal levels of threat, right? Like the old woman was with the broker and was threatening them with the broker, whereas the Rock wasn't necessarily threatening them, but like in tangential to them. So like more or less equal amounts of threat, but they deal with those situations in very different ways.
Yeah. I also think it was interesting kind of having like a druid versus druid thing.
Yeah.
Because it seems very much like this whole encounter was kind of like built with Keyleth in mind, and that whole sort of like moral quandary. Like, because it was another druid, and because that other druid immediately started challenging Keyleth in the way that she was a druid, it does really seem like this was built with Keyleth in mind to give her a chance to kind of like explore these different moral things and to see what she would do. And it's very interesting how, I mean, of course she always like stands firm, but even when she's challenged on being a druid by another druid, she still stands firm of like, no, like you can't take these livestock, but also like agrees that this is a beautiful creature and tries to problem solve ways to protect it.
Is this a coming of age story for Keyleth?
I think it kind of is.
Is it?
I think in a way it is. Like it's kind of like it's different also than the challenges that she has with her Aramente, because like the Aramente she's got a specific goal in mind, and there's kind of like the expectations of other people around here, but this one there's not really that same pressure. It's more putting her in like a natural situation away from pressures and what she's supposed to do, and giving her the space to decide what she thinks she's supposed to do.
There's a lot of fracturing in the group right now.
Yeah.
I think that that's rubbing everyone the wrong way too. Like,
I think so.
It's exacerbated by Tiberius going off on his own. Like, that's fracturing just in itself. But
he
then
goes off on his own. He gets drunk when they already have plans for an important mission. He begins touching Keyleth. And in that point, I didn't mention it because I was focusing more on what the characters did, but Orion was actually touching Marisha in the same way that he was like describing for Tiberius. And so Keyleth's reactions of "do not touch me" could very well have also been Marisha's exact reactions of "do not touch me." And kind of like that sort of like touching without consent.
Yeah, it's definitely non-consensual, and he does it 3 times, and on the third time, like, I don't know if it's Marisha saying it or whether it's Keyleth saying it, but she's like, fine, I just accept it this time. I'm not gonna fight this time, because he just wears her down enough to let him touch her, which is just ick factor to the nth degree.
And then there's the whole way that Tiberius, when he's drunk, starts making all of these comments about how pretty like Keyleth and Vex are, and it's just really uncomfortable because
Vax. He outs Vax in his drunken ramble as well, and he just makes an ass of himself in a lot of different ways in that. But that's like the most obvious fracturing in the group, but there's also moral fracturing within the group as well. Emotional because we also I'm missing Taliesin in this episode as well.
Yeah.
And so Percy is literally and metaphorically fractured from the group for this
And then the group is
episode.
actually planning in case he splits and does like hurts Desmond again.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole plan to keep Desmond safe. They talk about keeping Desmond safe from the Briarwoods, but it's also to keep Desmond safe from Percy. Like they
Yeah.
had that whole conversation with Jarrett. And so it's just like all of that not knowing what Percy is going to do because
Mhm.
they've just seen him act like vastly differently than they've ever seen him act before
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
encounter with the Briarwoods.
And it's like herding cats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for Keyleth, the stakes are very high right now because it's such a
Mm-hmm.
moral white black situation for her. When it's morally gray for everyone else, the stakes are
Yeah.
high. Plus, they've been literally ostracized from the Taldori Council and are no longer
Yeah.
even like allowed into the Cloudtop District in Amman. And
Mm-hmm.
so they are being fractured both in group and out group right now.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just bringing out people's stress habits, right? Like, I mean, moving
Mm-hmm.
on to personal experiences, I can definitely relate to Keyleth's struggle right now because I definitely used to be much more like her when I was younger, of like, you know, I had a very concrete idea of what was right and wrong and how things should go. And when A, I couldn't convince people to my side, or B, like things were too scattered to create cohesion in our response, like that was instantly triggering for me because I'm like, also I like efficiency. So, and I think
Mm-hmm.
Keyleth is also thinking in that way because there's this type of the stakes that are at play right now are so high for her that she wants it to have an easy solution. But there is no easy solution in this situation that they're finding
Mm-hmm.
themselves in. And it feels like herding cats when you're trying to like get something very important done and people are just
Yeah.
scattering off into different directions. Like it can be very frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also think it's interesting the difference between the group's reaction to Tiberius being drunk versus the group's reaction to like Keyleth being drunk, Pike being drunk, like other.
Yeah, because I think when other people get drunk, it's at like a timely time. It's at a time when there's downtime. It's not when they're trying to get other stuff done. And it's kind of was like it didn't need to be like it wasn't as if like Vax was just offering Tiberius like a swig and like didn't even think that he was actually going to take it because he mentioned that he's only ever seen Tiberius drinking water before. But Tiberius takes it, drains the whole flask, and then immediately acts drunk, doesn't even give like the standard wait time for the alcohol to set in, and then like is immediately like rather than just being like drunk but doing like helping with what Vox Machina is trying to do, he's like actively getting in the way of things
That's
and
an
keeps talking about Allura and how Allura can fix all their
yeah,
problems when it's like
yeah.
she's already explained that she's not going to get them out of this one. And like
It's interesting now that I'm thinking about the sequence of events. I think it was actually Matt who said that Tiberius was now drunk and that Tiberius
oh
had drank the entire flask. Because I think that was something that Matt said. I would have to go back and see that scene, but I think the sequence of events was Vax gave the flask to Tiberius. Tiberius did his little fire breath thing, handed it back, and then Matt said, and it's empty now. Like the flask is
yeah
empty. And I think that he pushed that ball forward for Tiberius
yeah
to be like insta drunk. But I think that that's an excellent parallel to the fractioning that's happening with the players right
mm-hmm
in Critical Role, IRL Critical Role, because
yeah
there's some fractioning happening within the player group as well at this time. And we talked about this in
absolutely
previous episodes of like how Matt and the other players are specifically trying to guide Orion in a certain direction with this, and Orion himself is being uncooperative as well. And so I
Yeah.
think this is like fractioning on top of fractioning on top of fractioning.
And of course, like they're all still dealing with the stress of what happened in the first part. Like all of that is fresh and immediate. Like we have an episode in between the first part and the next part, but they basically like only had their like 10-15 minute break in between. And so they're still dealing with the ramifications of what's going on and losing that trust. I honestly think that's one of the reasons why they decided to help with The Rock, because they originally were just like, we've got too many other big things to deal with. But I think they, after falling from the good graces of one faction of Iman, they wanted to like, show like get some people in their corner again. And instead of going with the elite, decided to help out the like farmers and some of the lower class of Iman.
I mean, they're a group of siblings that have been blamed for something from their parents.
Yeah.
And now that they are done with the scolding from their parents, they like go back to their room and they're like, this is your fault. No, this is your fault. This is your fault.
Yeah.
This is your fault. Like who's actually at fault here? Because it's not me. It's not me.
Yeah.
I was fine the entire time. It's you guys that made the bad call.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Any personal experiences that come to mind for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I talked about kind of last episode, it's just, and also because I'm like, I've been spending so much time at work now that I'm full time, I just think of kind of like the way things fractured when like we had that like toxic person working that I was telling you about, that I was mentioning last episode. And just how it kind of like, because that person was, I mean, it was more intentional sowing distrust than what Orion is doing. Orion is just like an incompatibility and like not following the rules of the table, whereas this person was kind of like turning people against each other and stuff like that. And then there was stress, like just in general from the situations and the problem that she was causing, but nobody knew what the source was. So a lot of people were like, blaming each other, getting mad at like other coworkers, overall created a really toxic work environment. And then it was only after that person left that things chilled out, and we were like, oh, it was just because of the tension from this like one person in one situation.
I mean, it makes all the difference. Like when you're trying to do team collaborative cooperation activities while also putting it within this moral context, like that's just going to make it a lot more complicated than it could be at the
Absolutely. And then also it's a high stress job. We're working with like, it's a youth shelter, and so we deal with crisis situations all the time. So there's already that like adrenaline pumping from when there is crisis situations. And so the combination of the adrenaline pumping plus the like kind of like discord zone among the various coworkers, it doesn't make for a very good combination. It gets a lot more like explosive than it would be, say, in like an office job.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember multiple times where I lost my temper at people just because I was in those like trying to make a moral call in the situation, but also efficiently and effectively, but also being pushed over my tolerance threshold at the same time, and being like, why can't you just like see it the way that I see it? Because if you see it the way that I see it, then like we could get this done and over with like now, instead of continuing in this mire of angst that we currently are in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what are we being called to do?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, just like continuing to keep an eye out in the workplace now that I'm kind of like the main full-time staff person. Just like, like making sure like if anybody's going to notice anything, it's going to be me, and just kind of like I'm kind of one of the main people helping to cultivate our new workplace dynamic. And so I think like doing my best to sort of like keep the cohesion and stuff, doing, at least from what I mean, obviously I can't do everything, but like doing my part to help keep the cohesion and help the workplace heal from what happened over the past year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the practices that I've had to learn actually just recently, honestly, this is like in the last year or so, maybe 2 years, is to go take care of my tolerance threshold on my own
Mm-hmm.
before I continue down the road that I was on.
Yeah.
Because old Claire would have just pushed through and like grinded through and like gone to the bitter end, because usually it was a bitter end to like grind through
Mm-hmm.
the tolerance threshold and just keep going. But I've learned that I need to step away and like deal with my tolerance threshold first before I, grind through, because most
Yeah.
of the time I can come up with a better option
Yeah.
if I lower that threshold than to just go through for the sake of time. Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is common in, mainstream society, but I was raised on the belief that like time was really was the most important factor to getting things done. Like as long
Mm.
as you got it done quickly, that was the point. It wasn't really quality, like, because we're always put on like deadlines, like arbitrary deadlines of like,
Yeah.
finish this homework by Tuesday afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
or write this paper by next Friday. We're
Yeah.
always like trained to be on these very arbitrary timelines. And so I was very much of the habit of putting time above all else, when really I need to like put stability and like emotional and mental wherewithal above time. Like it's okay if we're late. It just,
Mm-hmm.
we will have maybe a better outcome if we do that first
Yeah.
than the time factor of it, which I think is
Yeah.
what they're battling against right now too.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like,
Yeah,
well,
they're
we have
on
to
a
get this done because the Briarwoods are out there.
yeah, exactly. The Briarwoods are out there, but they're also like under investigation and all of these things. And like even with the bird, like there's that time pressure of like they're
Mm,
dwindling livestock. These
mm,
farmers are like depending on these animals for their livelihoods and don't necessarily have the money to replace the animals. And
mhm.
it's just like we need to find a timely situation for this because this is a big bird and it eats a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Time and morals are like oil and water. You can't make good moral decisions
Hmm.
on a time frame.
Yeah.
Like you can't factor time into that, otherwise you're just going to be making poor decisions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, that's so funny. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything.
Well, we did say last time that this is the bad Tiberius episode, but there's so
I was
many
wrong.
bad Tiberius episodes that it's hard to keep track of them, honestly.
What I got stuck on is because like episode 26 was a big episode
Mm,
in campaign 2
mm,
for switching up the party. My
mm,
brain automatically, because it's so close to the same number, my brain automatically was, oh, episode 26 is also Tiberius's
yeah.
last episode
I
in
mean,
campaign 1, but it's
it's on the ramp.
actually the next episode is Tiberius' last
Yeah.
episode. You
Yeah.
only have for sacred reading for our this podcast, only 2 more episodes left of Tiberius, but 1 more critical role episode,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you're done with Tiberius and Orion.
Yeah. I mean, he's on
This
the on
is
ramp.
this is my last Tiberius episode. I don't ever have to
Well,
talk about him again.
congratulations. I'm so happy for you. No, I mean, the writing's on the wall at this point with him.
Oh yeah.
And
Especially the like physical contact thing, like that was really really pushing things. Like
yeah.
it's one thing for him to be acting like a bit of like an idiot in character and
Mm,
like having like a bit of a like toxic thing, but the way that he was treating like the like female cast members and female characters was way out of bounds this time.
yeah. Yeah. I could write a whole thesis on this, but we shall get to it. So,
We shall get to it, or you shall get to it, not me.
yes. Well, we, the royal we. Um, Well, this is powerful stuff that we're talking about, and there might be some triggering stuff in this for our audience as well. Like, I've never explicitly said that on this podcast, but because we speak so much about trauma and healing and mental health and emotional health and all of these somewhat heavier topics, I do encourage our audience to do what you need to if you feel triggered by the things that we're talking about. And we're always here for you as well if you want someone to talk to, because the whole point of the sacred reading practice is to dive into these trickier subjects and to bring that self-reflective exercise to the world of Critical Role, because I know that Critical Role has emotionally impacted millions across the planet. And a lot of people are grateful and thankful for the show, for expanding their horizons, making them think, making them feel, making them laugh, you know, whatever it is. So, audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights and stories with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role and these stories have impacted you in your own lives. So special thanks to Petall for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep, and we will be trying out this on-off kind of schedule going forward. We're just trying something else because my schedule is insane. And writing notes every time takes up a lot of time. So
definitely a big difference between putting on the episode in the background while you do other things in preparation, and then having your full focus be on preparation for the episode.
Yeah. So we're gonna try it out and see how it goes. But until next time, we will be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 27, Part 1, and joining me will be Atlas for that. So I'm super excited. And as always, I'm always looking for more co-hosts and guests. So if you're a critter with a lot of opinions, hit me up. I'll send you the link. We're always happy to chat. In the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below. Check us out on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR. And until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and be the chaotic good you wish to see in the world. Take care, guys.